Yes, I was. First, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you among the very best of mainly of the South American squash and many of the other nations. It's a very good chance. It's a pleasure for me. Yeah, I'm planning. I have just slides of PowerPoint presentation, just with the main points that I want to talk about, just to have it in front of you. So when I talk about it, it's easier to grasp. Okay. As we said, I'm going to mainly talk about the rise of the Egyptian squash as a sports success story in the last. Actually, I'll try to summarize what happened in Egyptian squash in the last 30 years in 30 minutes. That's my target. My outline will be just a little bit about myself and the history of Egyptian squash, and then the rise of the Egyptian squash and the dominance of the Egyptian squash. And then we'll talk more about the reasons of why this happened. And then at the end, we'll talk about the junior development currently in Egypt. And as an example for it, I'll talk about my own academy's technical program as an example of what we do now in junior development in Egypt. Okay, just briefly about myself, I'm a WSF certified coach and tutor. I'm the former Egyptian national coach, founder of Elbolorossi Squash Academy, which is now the biggest squash academy in the world. 3 times Egyptian national men champion, twice world team champion, once were juniors and once senior. Top 20 PSA player from 96 to 2004. Then I'm the world masters champion over 35. Okay, we'll talk briefly about the Egyptian squash history. Squash has been in Egypt for almost 100 years now, 90 years. The Egyptian Squash Federation was founded in 1931. Squash was introduced by in Egypt as a British colony, like in Egypt and Australia, India and Pakistan, and most of the other British colonies. We've been having world champions since the 30s. There was not the World Open, but there was the biggest tournament was the British Open. We had Abdel Fattah Amr as a British Open champion in the 30s.
The best beach in the world.
Mahmoud Abdel Karim in the 40s, and then Abdel Fattah Abu Talib in the 60s. Those are our pioneers, as we name them.
Okay.
Okay, next part is the rise of the Egyptian squash. The real beginning of the world dominance started with our foundation of the Egyptian junior team in the late 80s and the early 90s by Coach Abdel Wahid Abdel Aziz and Dr. Samiha Abul Majd, who actually both died last year, but they founded the boys and the girls Egyptian junior teams, and then started with our first win. Our first world win was the World Junior Men's in 1994 in New Zealand. And I was lucky enough that I was the captain of the Egyptian team at this tournament, where Egypt won for the first time. We won the individual and the world titles. I played in the final of the individuals with Ahmed Barada, and we won the world title in the teams event in '94. 5 years later, same team, we won the senior team event, the men team event. It was held in Cairo in 1999. And then few years later, the beginning of the girls and the women teams. World Junior Women 2003 in Cairo. That was the first win for the Egyptian team as well. And also 5 years later, when same team played in the women event, we had our first win in the World Teams event in women in 2008. So those 4 events were the first times in Egyptian squash history, and actually in Egyptian sports history, that we became world champions. And I'm going to talk about this later. That was the first real world championship for Egypt in any sports. So that was the real beginning. Okay, next thing, as I said, this was a very big for Egypt to have to start having world champions in any sports. So we're starting to have very, very good media coverage. We started to introduce the Al Ahram tournament, which was one of the main reasons of getting Egyptian squash very popular here, getting squash very popular in Egypt. This photo is still used. This photo is almost 20 years ago. It's still used as the best ever squash venue and the best ever squash event. We've been doing it almost yearly event. But this event is a very big in Egypt. It's live on TV. It has very big media coverage, and it all started after our win of the junior and the senior tournaments, and then sponsors started to promote the tournaments, and also it helped really big time in Egyptian development. Mm-hmm. Okay, next thing also related, that's we were lucky that we had a very big political influence at that time. This is a photo of President Mubarak, was the last president in Egypt in the 80s and the 90s. He was a very big squash fan, and he was a squash player himself. He promoted squash very well, and because also all the media and all the ministers and everyone knew that he loved squash. So everyone gave a very good attention for squash. When we used to win tournaments, when we won the world championship, the next week he comes and meet us. He used to give us like accreditation from the country. Also really helped in the very big media coverage, because we were supported by the president himself, who was a big squash fan. So we had very big political support and media coverage as well. Okay, this is just an example of how dominant now Egyptian squash is on the world titles. This is some statistics of the current rankings and events. In the PSA ranking now, we have actually more than 50% of the top 10 PSA players are Egyptians. We have 6 out of the top 10 in the men, including the top 4, and 5 out of the top 10 in women, including the top 3. The Egyptian team, since the tournament in '94, we have won 23 world teams title only in the last 27 years. 4 men titles, 4 women titles, 6 junior titles, 6 junior men, 9 junior women titles. Okay, and individually, that's the continuing of the dominance. The top juniors in individuals, also 27 world individual junior titles in 27 years. 10 world junior champions and 10 men world junior champions and 8 girls world junior champions. Also in the last 27 years. 27 titles in the last 27 years in the juniors. For sure, most of those juniors, each of them won 2 or 3 titles. I mean, those are the names of the champions, but each of them won many titles. Like Shourbaghi and Rami Ashur and Mustafa Asal and Omnia Abdelkawi and Ranim and Noor Sherbini. Most of them won 2 or 3 world junior titles. Okay, in the PSA ranking, the top professionals, we have 9 world number ones, 9 players who reached world number 1. And this is also in the last 20 years. And 8 of them were world champions. I think Shabana, Darwish, Rami Ashur, Karim Abdelgawad, Shourbaghi, Ali Farag, Tariq Mu'min, and then Ranim and Noor Sherbini in the women. Okay, I'm gonna just now talk more about the reasons other than the media and the political influence and everything. Those are the main reasons. Like one of the main reasons, as we call it, is the Egyptian style. And I simplify it in the creativity and attitude. We as Egyptian, actually, this is a bit similar to the South American culture, because our culture is very creative. It's not very basic and strict. We don't play by the book. We like to go out of the rules, out of the ordinary. We don't really like the routine. I'm sure that most of you understand what I'm talking about. So this helped really in our squash, because the squash is has very much of variations in the game, and it's the creativity and this type of variations help us in our game. So our game is very different than the old standard British game or the European game. Okay, the second and the third part is the role models. We have lots, as you can see, we have lots of world champions, lots of top players who are training in the clubs in Egyptian. So the juniors, they always see big role models. They see them training, they imitate them, they want to be like them. But it's very important to have role models. Also, same thing, and it's related, that the former champions like myself and like Shabana and like many, like Amir Wagih, like many of the top players in Egypt, they come back to the game and work as coaches and as trainers for the juniors. So this is also very helpful for the game. Okay, the next part is also the availability of the courts and the training now. This is very new in the last maybe 15 years or 20 years maximum. After squash became very popular and due to the good media coverage and events, and lots of junior players want to play. So now we have lots of private clubs and private academies now, and also in public clubs we built more courts, and squash became much bigger. So it became available to much more people playing squash in Egypt now. Like the number of players in Egypt now is almost 10 times the number of players in like maybe 20 years ago at least. But now the availability of the courts and the clubs and the academies is also a very important aspect of why we're doing well in squash now. Okay, one of the other reasons also, like I put it at the end, but it's very actually it's a remark that it's not all about that the Egyptians are very good and that's it. I think one of the reasons is the decline or the weakening of the major international competitors. Maybe it's a coincidence, but usually like squash in the 70s and the 80s was mainly dominant by England, by Pakistan, by Australia. Now Pakistan, they're not that well now due to political reasons, and it's very hard for them to organize tournaments or have their players traveling and playing abroad. Australia also, maybe because it's very far for the players to travel, they start to weakening. Also England, squash now is not as popular as it used to be in the 70s and the 80s. Many of the squash clubs, they closed down and they transformed to other sports. So part of why Egypt is dominating the world now, that also some of the main competitors are not as strong as they used to be. Okay, so just to conclude this part about the reasons, I always need to say, because people, they always ask me like, what's the secret of Egyptian success? What's the secret of Egyptian dominance? My always answer is there's no secret. There's no secret recipe. As you can see, there's like 10 different reasons. There's the history, there's the rise, there's the role model, there's the availability, there's the creativity and the Egyptian style. There's also I'm going to talk about the parents and the parent support. Actually, it's the last part is also the social part and the parents' support to their kids in Egypt. So it's so many reasons. There's no just one secret for why Egypt is doing well. Okay, so I'm gonna move to the next part, just the last part about. I'm gonna talk briefly about the junior development in Egypt. What's happening now? Now we finished what happened in the last 30 years. What's happening now? We have now huge private clubs and huge private academies in Egypt. I'm just gonna give like few examples. Like only in my own academy, I have Elbolorossi Squash Academy. There's Black Ball Squash Club. There's Wadi Degla Club, and there are two big clubs in Alexandria. Sporting and Smuha clubs. Only those 5 entities, they have more than 3,000 junior players training in them. This is the statistic. We have more than 3,000 juniors in just those 5 big academies. Okay, the next thing is the national junior tournaments and the national league. We have also, it's one of the big reasons why the Egyptian juniors specifically are winning in the international tournaments, because we have a very big and very strong national junior tournaments. Like we have tournaments from under 11. You find the draws for the tournaments, 128 players, girls under 11, 128 boys under 11. girls under 13, it's 128 draws for each junior group. Like our local tournaments usually have over 1,000 junior playing, only in any of the local tournaments that are played on weekends. We have more than 20 tournaments a year. Every tournament has more than 1,000 juniors competing. It's very big. It's bigger than the British Open, bigger than the US Open, bigger than the World Junior Open. But when the Egyptian players, they go abroad and play the international tournaments, it's actually usually less stressful for them. It's less people, less competition. They already used to play much harder matches in front of many people, more stressful conditions. But it's easier for them to play the international event. So it gives them a very big advantage when they play international tournaments. Okay, just next thing and the last thing, I'm going to talk about just an example of how we work in Egypt with junior, how we work in the junior development and the training program. This is the training program of my own academy. I have developed it we've been working for the last 15 years. It's very simple, but it's actually maybe the only squash curriculum, as we can say, squash training system that's divided by levels. Like all the juniors are divided by like starting the beginners till reaching, we have 6 levels from the beginners till the team and or competition level. Every level has the specific trainers and specific training drills that we do on each level, and all the players are evaluated every 3 months to see if they can go to the next level or they will stay in the same level and do it once again. And then they move from one level to the other till they reach the team level or the competition level. Okay, and this is just an example of one of the levels. I have the technical program with the academy was done with coach Hisham Al-Attar, who used to be the head coach of the academy. This is just one example of level 2, for example, in the academy. We have for each level, we write down what we need the player or the junior to learn from this level, and then after we write it down, we have the drills with like photos and demonstrations for what to do in each program. Just to give the idea to the coaches and the trainers who will work on this level, and then they will explain to the players what they will do in this work. And also we have diagrams of the training, how the player will move from one point to the other and hit the ball, for example. I'm not going to go into details, just wanted to show that we have a program for each level. There's specific trainers for specific training drills to be done for each level. So the players acquire all what they need, and they go gradually from one level to another. And they have all the technical abilities to go from one level to the other. And just to give you an idea of the scale of what's done, I have in my academy almost more than 1,000 players now. This is done, and the evaluation every 3 months, and all the system is applied to more than 1,000 juniors from the age of 5 years old till 12 years old. It's more than 1,000 players in 8. We now have 8 branches in Egypt. So definitely when we work and when we have this big number and we work with them in a good technical program, we definitely at least will have 10 or 15 top world players out of those 1,000 in few years. Okay, thank you very much. This is just about, I tried to be as brief and as efficient as possible in time, so we can give, if we have some time, I'm more welcoming any questions from you, or if you need me to go to explain more on any of the points that I mentioned, I'm more welcome to discuss anything that you need me to do.